Josephine Wright woke up at 5:30 a.m., even though her alarm clock wasn't set to go off for another half hour. She lay in her dimly lit bedroom, listening to Tom's steady breathing beside her, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep would not come again. For several months now, she had been waking up long before dawn, and every morning began with the same thought, which ate into her consciousness like rust into metal. She could no longer live like this. She was 40 years old, and for the last 9 of those years, she had been living a constant lie. Every day, every hour, every glance at her children reminded her of this. Josephine quietly got out of bed, put on her robe, and went downstairs to the first floor of their house on Johnson Street. The house was modest, a 2-story structure with peeling paint on the porch, which they had bought 12 years ago when their second daughter was born. Back then, everything was different. In the kitchen, she turned on the coffee maker and looked at the photos pinned to the refrigerator with magnets. A family portrait from last summer. Tom with his arm around her shoulder, their 5 children lined up in front of them. Emily, 17, and Jacob, 15, tall, blonde, looking like their father. Then Kayla, 8, Ethan, 6, and little Sophie, 4, the 3 youngest. Her stomach tightened with the familiar pain. Josephine worked as a cashier at the Piggly Wiggly supermarket on the corner of Main Street and Park Avenue. Her shift started at 8, and she was usually the first to open her register. The work was monotonous, scanning items, smiling at customers, giving change. She loved the monotony. For 8 hours, she could not think, just perform mechanical actions while her hands scanned barcodes and her head was empty. Tom worked as an operator at the Southern Timber Sawmill, a 20-minute drive from the city. He got up at 6, ate the eggs and bacon she made for him every morning, kissed her on the cheek, and drove off in his beat-up 1997 Ford pickup truck. He was a good husband. He never raised a hand to her, never drank more than a couple of beers on the weekends, and helped with the children. He loved all 5 of them equally. That was what tore Josephine apart inside. On Wednesday evening, while Tom was at work and the children were doing their homework or watching TV, Josephine got into her old Honda and drove to the Baptist church on Church Street. Reverend James Cole was there, as he always was on Wednesdays, preparing for the evening service. The church was small, painted white, with wooden pews that were over 70 years old. She went inside and found him in the front row, bent over his Bible. He looked up, saw her, and smiled. The warm, fatherly smile of a man who had spent 30 years listening to other people's sins and pain. Reverend Cole was a short man with graying hair and kind eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. He gestured for her to sit next to him. Josephine sank down onto the pew, clasping her hands so tightly that her knuckles turned white. They sat in silence for several minutes. She had been here 4 times in the last month, and each time it ended the same way. She couldn't bring herself to say the words out loud. The Reverend waited patiently. He didn't pressure her or ask direct questions. He was just there. Josephine opened her mouth, but her voice caught in her throat. How could she say it out loud? How could she say something that would destroy everything? She imagined Tom's face when he found out. She imagined how he would look at the younger children he loved as his own, whom he had raised, to whom he had read bedtime stories and taught to ride bicycles. She stood up, muttering an apology, and left the church, leaving Reverend Cole sitting there in bewilderment. It all started 9 years ago. Tom had gone to Louisiana for 2 weeks to learn how to use new equipment for the sawmill. At the time, they only had 2 children. Emily was 8, Jacob was 6. Josephine was 4 months pregnant with Kayla. Kevin, Tom's younger brother, came to help her repair the roof. The roof had been leaking for several months, and they had been putting off repairs because of the cost. Kevin was 4 years younger than Tom, more talkative, more charming. He worked as a warehouse manager at Delta Supply and earned more than his brother. He wasn't married, although he constantly said he was looking for the right girl. He repaired the roof on the first day, and on the second day too. On the third day, it rained, and the work had to be postponed. They sat in the kitchen, drank coffee, and Kevin told her about his work and his plans to buy a house. Josephine laughed, for the first time in a long time. She and Tom had hardly spoken in recent months. He was tired from work, she was tired from the children and her pregnancy. Their life had become routine. Kevin was attentive. He listened to her and looked at her as if she were interesting. It was foolish. Josephine understood that even then. But she felt lonely, and when Kevin touched her hand and said something encouraging, she didn't pull away. It happened on the fourth day. The children were at school. Josephine hadn't planned it, she didn't want it, but it happened. And then it happened again, and again. The 2 weeks Tom was away turned into a nightmare of guilt and shame mixed with something she couldn't name. When Tom returned, she swore to herself that it would never happen again. She was a good wife, a good mother. It was a one-time thing, and she would bury it inside herself forever. But a month later, Kevin came back. He said he wanted to check the roof. Tom was home, and they went upstairs together, checked the work, and everything was fine. Then Kevin stayed for dinner. At the table, he looked at Josephine, and she knew he would be back. And he did come back. Once a month, once every 2 weeks, when Tom wasn't home. Sometimes they didn't even sleep together. They just sat and talked. Kevin said he loved her. Josephine didn't know what she felt. She only knew that she couldn't stop. It was like an illness, like an addiction. She hated herself after every meeting, but when he called, she agreed. Kayla was born with darker hair than Tom and Emily. Josephine blamed it on her genes. Her father had dark hair. Tom didn't ask any questions. Then there was Ethan, 2 years later, and Sophie 2 years after that. Josephine knew. She had always known, but she hoped she could bury it forever. On Friday evening, as usual, Kevin came over for dinner. He often came on Fridays, a family tradition, as Tom said. The brothers were close. They grew up together after their father died in an accident when Kevin was 10. Tom took care of his younger brother, helping him finish school and find a job. At the table, Tom poured lemonade for the children. Kevin told a story from work, and Josephine watched them all. Emily, their eldest, almost an adult, helped set the table. Jacob played on his phone, occasionally looking up. The 3 youngest were noisy, laughing, demanding attention. Josephine saw Kevin looking at Sophie, his daughter, although only the 2 of them knew it. She saw him smiling at Ethan when the boy showed him a drawing from school. And she saw Tom, who loved them all equally, unaware of the truth. After dinner, when the children had gone to their rooms and Tom had gone out to the garage to check something in the car, Kevin stayed to help with the dishes. He stood next to her at the sink, and his presence was unbearable. Josephine felt the walls closing in on her. He started talking about mundane things, the weather, work, but she interrupted him. Her voice was quiet, but firm. She said it couldn't go on like this, that it had to end, that she had to tell Tom. Kevin turned pale. He grabbed her arm too hard and hissed that she couldn't do that it would ruin everything, that he had a girlfriend now, and they were planning to get married, that no one needed the truth. Josephine pulled her hand away. She looked at him, the man with whom she had shared this terrible secret for 9 years, and saw him for the first time. He didn't love her. He never had. He was a selfish man who had taken what he wanted and now feared the consequences. Kevin left a few minutes later, citing a headache. Tom returned to the house and found Josephine standing at the sink with wet hands and a blank stare. He hugged her from behind, kissed her on the top of her head, and told her he loved her. She closed her eyes and felt tears running down her cheeks. On Saturday morning, Josephine took the younger children to the park. It was cool for October, but sunny. Sophie swung on the swings, Ethan and Kayla played on the slide. Josephine sat on a bench and watched them. They were so innocent, so happy. They hadn't asked for this. They didn't deserve what the adults had done to their lives. She made a decision. She would tell Tom. Tonight, after the children went to bed. She would tell him everything. About Kevin, about the children, about everything. Let it ruin her life. But she couldn't live with this lie anymore. 9 years was enough. Josephine didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if Tom would forgive her. She didn't know what would happen to the children, to their family. But she knew one thing. The truth, no matter how terrible, was better than continuing this endless lie. That evening, when they returned home, Tom was working in the garage. Josephine went in and just stood there watching him. He was tinkering with the lawnmower engine, his hands covered in oil, but he was smiling. The simple joy of a man who fixes things with his own hands. He looked up, saw her, and asked if everything was okay. Josephine nodded. She wanted to say it now, wanted to let out the words that would destroy everything. But Tom had already returned to the lawnmower, whistling some tune, and the moment had passed. Tonight, she told herself, when the children are asleep. Tonight. Josephine put Sophie to bed last. The girl asked for another story, then another glass of water, then for her mother to sit with her. Josephine sat on the edge of the bed, stroking her daughter's hair, and felt everything inside her tighten. Sophie looked so much like Kevin, the same dark hair, the same face shape. How had she not noticed before? How had Tom not noticed? When the girl finally fell asleep, Josephine left the room and closed the door. The house was quiet. The clock on the wall showed 10:30. Tom was sitting in the living room watching some sports program, a can of beer on the coffee table in front of him. He looked relaxed and content. The end of the work week, all the children healthy and at home, his wife by his side. The usual family idyll. Josephine sat down next to him on the sofa. Tom turned to her, smiled, and put his hand on her knee. This simple gesture of affection was unbearable. She took his hand in hers, and he, sensing something was wrong, turned off the TV. He looked at her more closely. She began to speak. The words came out with difficulty, as if each one cut her throat. She said there was something he needed to know, something she had been hiding for a very long time. Tom frowned, his face becoming serious. He asked if she was all right. Josephine shook her head. It was worse than that. She told him everything. How it had started 9 years ago when he was in Louisiana. About Kevin, about the roof, about those 2 weeks. That the connection hadn't ended then, that it had continued. That the 3 youngest children, Kayla, Ethan, Sophie, weren't his. Tom sat motionless. His face showed nothing. No anger, no pain, nothing. He just stared at her as if she were speaking a foreign language. A minute of silence passed, then another. Josephine could see his brain trying to process information that didn't fit into any framework. He asked if it was true or some kind of sick joke. His voice was strangely flat, as if he were under anesthesia. Josephine covered her face with her hands and nodded. It was true. The whole horrible truth. Tom got up from the sofa. He walked across the room to the window. He stood there with his back to her, his shoulders tensed, his fists clenched. Josephine could see a tremor running through his body. Then he turned around, and there was such pain and incomprehension on his face that she could barely bear to look at him. He asked about Kevin, his brother, the man he trusted, the man who had raised him after his father's death. Josephine nodded. Tom ran his hand over his face, as if trying to erase what he had just heard. He asked how long it had been going on. She said 9 years. Not constantly, not every day, but regularly. Until last month. Tom sank to the floor, leaning his back against the wall. He sat there, his head in his hands. Josephine could see his chest heaving with suppressed sobs. She walked over to him, tried to touch his shoulder, but he pulled away so sharply, as if she had shocked him. "Don't touch me," he said. His voice was hoarse and breaking. "Just don't touch me." She told him the rest. How she had hated herself all these years. How every day had been torture. How she had tried to stop, but couldn't. How she blamed herself for every lie, For every moment she looked him in the eye and said nothing. Tom didn't react. He just sat on the floor, staring at one spot. Then he asked about the children. Was he sure that Emily and Jacob were his? Josephine nodded quickly. Only the older two. He asked again, "Are you sure?" She swore. Tom closed his eyes. So, the 3 younger ones. 3 out of 5. The children he loved, raised, put to bed, taught to ride a bike, nursed when they were sick. Not his children. He got up, walked past her into the hallway, and climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. Josephine heard him open the closet in their bedroom. A few minutes later, he came back down with a family photo album. He sat down at the kitchen table and began leafing through the pages. Josephine stood in the doorway, not daring to come closer. Tom laid out the photos side by side. His childhood photos, photos of Kevin at the same age, photos of their children. He compared faces, features, nose shapes, hair colors. Emily and Jacob were copies of Tom as a child. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the same smile. Kayla, Ethan, Sophie, dark-haired, brown-eyed, with features that now that he knew the truth, so clearly resembled Kevin. How had he not seen this before? He had looked at these children every day for 9 years and not noticed, or didn't want to notice, or trusted his wife and brother so much that the thought of betrayal never even crossed his mind. He closed the album and looked at Josephine. He asked what she wanted from him now. Forgiveness? Understanding? For him to pretend he knew nothing and for them to continue living as before? Josephine shook her head. She didn't know what would happen next. She just couldn't lie anymore. Tom put on his jacket and took his car keys. He said he needed to think, that he couldn't be here right now. He left the house, and a minute later, Josephine heard his pickup truck drive away. The clock showed 1 o'clock in the morning. She sat down on the floor in the middle of the kitchen and cried, long and quietly, so as not to wake the children. When the tears stopped, she got up, put away the photos, turned off the light, and lay down on the sofa. She couldn't sleep. She lay with her eyes open until dawn. In the morning, the children needed to be fed, dressed, and prepared for Sunday school at church. Emily asked where her dad was. Josephine said he had left early in the morning because he had things to do. Her daughter looked at her strangely. She had always been a perceptive child, but she said nothing. Tom returned on Monday morning. He looked terrible, unshaven, with red eyes, in wrinkled clothes. He went upstairs, took a shower, and changed his clothes. He came back downstairs, drank his coffee standing by the window. Josephine didn't dare speak. Finally, he said he was going to talk to Kevin. Today. She nodded. Tom left. Josephine called work and said she was sick and wouldn't be coming in today. She sat at home and waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for. A phone call? The police? Worse news? Tom arrived at the Delta Supply warehouse around 10 in the morning. The site was large, several hangars, loading docks, trucks. Kevin's office was in a small building next to the main hangar. Tom parked at the entrance and climbed the stairs. The secretary said that Mr. Wright was there and he could come in. Kevin was sitting at his desk, sorting through some invoices. He looked up, saw his brother, and smiled. A normal, unsuspecting smile. "Tom, hi. I wasn't expecting you. Did something happen?" Tom closed the door behind him. He looked at his brother for a long time. Kevin frowned, the smile fading from his face. "Tom?" Tom asked directly. "Is it true? What Josephine said?" Kevin turned pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Tom repeated the question louder. "Is it true?" Kevin began to deny it. Quickly, incoherently. He didn't know what she was talking about. Josephine had made it up. Maybe she had mental problems, postpartum depression or something like that. Tom listened, and with each word, his face grew stonier. Then he walked over to the table and placed the printed photos on it, the children next to photos of Kevin as a child. Kevin looked at them and fell silent. The evidence was clear. The resemblance was undeniable. Kevin sank into a chair. He covered his face with his hands. He sat there in silence for several minutes. Then he spoke, quietly, without excuses. Yes, it was true. It had happened. He hadn't wanted it, hadn't planned it. It just happened. And it continued. He didn't know why. He just couldn't stop. Tom asked if he knew how he had felt all these years, raising other people's children. How he had felt when he hugged them and called them his own. Kevin said that the children weren't to blame, that they weren't guilty of anything. Tom didn't answer. Then Tom said one sentence. "I don't want to see you anymore. Ever. You're dead to me. Understand? Dead." Kevin nodded. Tom turned and left the office, went downstairs, got in his car. He sat there for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Then he started the engine and drove away. But he didn't go home. He couldn't. Instead, he stopped at the roadside inn on Route 82 and rented a room for an indefinite period. The room was small, with a worn carpet and the smell of cigarettes. Tom lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Josephine waited until evening. Then she called him. Tom answered after the 5th ring. His voice was empty, detached. He said he was staying at the motel. He needed time. She asked how much time. He didn't know. Maybe a week. Maybe more. Maybe forever. She asked about the children. What should she tell them? Tom was silent for a moment. Then he replied, "Tell them I'm away on business. For now, just say that." He hung up. Emily stood in the kitchen doorway, listening to the conversation. When Josephine turned around, her daughter looked at her with an understanding beyond her years. She asked directly, "Are you getting divorced?" Josephine didn't know what to say. She didn't know what would happen next. She had destroyed her family, her husband's life, her children's future. And for what? For a secret affair that she herself hated? For moments of weakness that turned into years of lies? She hugged her daughter and held her close. Emily stood stiffly, not hugging her back. Then she broke free and went upstairs to her room. Josephine heard the door slam. That night, the younger children asked where their father was. Josephine repeated the same thing over and over again. Their father had gone away on business and would be back soon. Sophie cried and said she missed her dad. Josephine rocked her, sang a lullaby, and felt everything inside her die. Tom didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. A week passed. He called occasionally to ask about the children, but the conversations were short and formal. Josephine didn't insist. She knew she deserved this silence, this coldness, this anger. Kevin didn't show up. He didn't call. It was as if he had never existed. Josephine learned from mutual acquaintances that he had taken a leave of absence from work. No one knew where he had gone. Life turned into waiting. Josephine didn't know what she was waiting for. A divorce? Forgiveness? A miracle? She just existed, day after day, feeding the children, taking them to school, working, coming home. The house without Tom seemed empty, dead. The 8th day. Josephine was sitting in the living room in complete darkness when she heard the sound of an engine on the driveway. The clock showed 10:30 in the evening. The children were asleep upstairs. She went to the window and saw Tom's pickup truck. He sat in the cab for 10 minutes without getting out, then finally opened the door. Tom looked worse than he had a week ago. He had lost weight, his stubble had grown into a beard, and his clothes were dirty. The smell of alcohol was noticeable when he entered the house. He didn't look at Josephine, walked past her into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and took out a bottle of water. He drank for a long time, greedily. Josephine stood in the kitchen doorway. She asked quietly how he was. Tom shrugged. She tried to get closer, but he backed away toward the wall. His eyes were red, but not from crying, from lack of sleep and alcohol. He said he had come to pick up his things, clean clothes, documents, then he would go back. She said it couldn't go on like this, that the children asked about him every day, that Sophie cried at night, calling for her daddy. Tom clenched his jaw, his face contorted with pain. He said he didn't know how to look at them, at Kayla, Ethan, Sophie, how to hug them, knowing the truth, how to pretend that nothing had changed when everything had changed. Josephine sat down at the table and covered her face with her hands. Quietly, so as not to wake the children, she said she understood, that she wasn't asking for forgiveness, she didn't deserve it. But the children weren't to blame. They loved him. To them, he was their dad, the only dad they knew. Tom leaned against the wall and slowly slid to the floor. He sat there, his head in his hands. He spoke incoherently, more to himself than to her, about how he put Sophie to bed and read her fairy tales, how he taught Ethan to catch a ball, how proud he was when Kayla got an A in math. 9 years. For 9 years, he had loved these children, considered them his own, but they had never been his children. Josephine crawled closer and sat down next to him on the floor, without touching him, just next to him. She said that love doesn't disappear with the truth, that he raised them, that he was a real father to them, regardless of blood. Tom turned to her, and there was so much pain in his eyes that she could barely bear to look at him. He asked her what he was to her, a husband, or just a man she had betrayed for 9 years? Josephine was silent. There was no right answer. Anything she could say would be a lie or cause pain. Tom got up, went upstairs, and packed his things into a bag. When he came downstairs, Emily was standing in the hallway. The daughter looked at her father, then at her mother below. She asked, "Is Dad leaving again?" Tom walked over to his daughter and hugged her tightly. Emily pressed herself against him, and Josephine saw tears running down the girl's cheeks. Tom whispered something to her, too quietly for Josephine to hear. Then he let her go, quickly went down the stairs, and left the house. Emily watched him go, then turned to her mother. There were no questions on her face, only understanding and something like disappointment. Her daughter returned to her room. Josephine was left alone in the empty house. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. Josephine opened it and found Kevin on the doorstep. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, unshaven, nervous. He quickly glanced over his shoulder, as if checking to see if anyone was following him. He asked to come in, just for a minute. Josephine wanted to slam the door in his face. This man was the reason her family had fallen apart, but she let him in and led him to the kitchen. Kevin sat down at the table, his hands shaking as he clasped them together. He began to speak quickly, incoherently. He said that his fiancée had found out. He hadn't told her himself. She had met Tom in town, and he had told her everything, right there in the middle of the street. Now the wedding was off. His fiancée was packing her things and leaving. People at work had started asking questions. Where had he been for a week? Why did he look like a homeless person? His life was falling apart. Josephine listened without sympathy. She asked what he wanted. Kevin begged her not to tell anyone else, not to tell their mutual friends, not to tell anyone at work. His boss was a strict religious man, and if he found out about such a scandal, he would fire him immediately. Kevin had a mortgage and loans. He couldn't lose his job. Josephine looked at him for a long time. This man had slept with his brother's wife for 9 years, had 3 children with her, and now he was worried about his job, about his reputation. She told him to leave. Kevin stood up, but didn't leave right away. He stood by the door, then asked quietly, "Do you regret telling Tom?" Josephine turned to him. She said slowly, clearly, that the only thing she regretted was allowing this to happen, that she hadn't stopped after the first time, that she had lied to her husband for 9 years. Kevin nodded, opened the door, and left. She never saw him again. Tom came home 3 days later. This time it wasn't at night, but during the day when the younger children were home. Sophie saw him first, screamed with joy, and ran to hug him. Ethan and Kayla followed her. They hung on him, asking a million questions: where he had been, why he hadn't come, why he hadn't called. Tom stood in the middle of the living room with the 3 children around him and looked at Josephine over their heads. His face was stony, but there was so much emotion in his eyes that she couldn't make it out. Pain, love, anger, despair, all at once. He knelt down and hugged all 3 of them. Josephine saw his shoulders tense, saw him close his eyes as he held the children close. She saw him struggling with something inside himself. Then he let them go and said that Daddy was tired and needed to rest. The children ran off to play, happy that he was home. Josephine moved closer. She asked if he was staying. Tom looked at her, then at the stairs leading upstairs, where the children were laughing. He said he didn't know, that he had come to try to be here, with the children. But every time he looked at Kayla, Ethan, and Sophie, he saw Kevin. He saw betrayal. He saw lies. There was a knock at the door. Josephine opened it and saw Reverend James Cole. The priest apologized for visiting unannounced, but said he had to come. He had heard rumors in town. It was a small town. Everyone knew everything. He wanted to help if he could. Tom went out into the hallway. Reverend Cole looked at him with sympathy. He suggested they talk, alone, if Tom wanted. Tom agreed, and they went out onto the porch and sat down on old wooden chairs. Josephine stayed inside, but she could hear snippets of their conversation through the open window. The Reverend spoke of forgiveness, that anger and pain were natural, but they corroded the soul, that keeping these feelings inside meant allowing betrayal to destroy not only the family, but the person themselves. Tom replied sharply, "It was easy to talk about forgiveness when it wasn't your wife who had slept with your brother for 9 years, when it wasn't your children who turned out not to be yours." The priest did not argue. He agreed that it was almost unbearable pain, but the children were definitely innocent. They loved Tom. They had not chosen how to be born. Tom was silent for a long time. Then he said quietly, I know they are not to blame, but how can I look at them and not think about it? How can I love them, knowing the truth?" Reverend Cole put his hand on Tom's shoulder. He said that love does not depend on blood, that for 9 years, Tom had been their father, a real, loving father. That truth had not changed. Only the circumstances had changed, but not the love. Tom buried his head in his hands. Josephine saw his shoulders shaking. When the Reverend left, Tom returned to the house. He went upstairs, lay down on the bed in the guest room, and turned away to face the wall. Josephine stood in the doorway, not knowing what to say. Finally, she decided to go in. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She said what she should have said long ago, that if he wanted her to, she would leave. She would find an apartment, a place to rent, and take the children with her. She would give him a divorce and ask for nothing in return. She would simply free him from this nightmare. Tom did not turn around. He was silent for so long that she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "What about the children?" Emily and Jacob were his children. He didn't want to lose them. But the other 3 were attached to him too. How could she divide the family? How could she explain to the children why they couldn't be together? Josephine didn't know the answer. There was no right answer. She said they needed to make a decision. Soon. It was impossible to live like this, in limbo, with no one knowing what tomorrow would bring. The children could sense the tension, especially the older ones. Tom turned to her. His face was blank, empty. He said, "A week. Give me a week to think. Then I'll tell you what I've decided." Josephine nodded. She stood up, left the room, and quietly closed the door. She went downstairs, where the younger children were playing in the living room. Sophie ran up to her and asked if Daddy would stay home now. Josephine hugged her daughter, not knowing what to say. She said, "We'll see, sweetie, we'll see." The next few days were like walking through a minefield. Tom stayed at home, but lived like a ghost. He got up early, left for work, and came back late. He sat silently at dinner, hardly eating. He communicated with the children as little as possible. Routine questions about school, short answers. Emily and Jacob were silent, sensing that something was wrong. The younger children tried to get their father's attention, but he seemed not to notice them. At night, Tom slept in the guest room. Josephine lay alone in their bedroom, listening to the sounds of the house. Sometimes she heard him walking down the hall at 3 or 4 in the morning. Insomnia tormented them both. Josephine began looking for rental options. She looked at ads, called numbers, and checked prices. Her salary as a cashier was small, but it would be enough for a modest apartment. She was preparing for the inevitable: divorce, division of property, a new life without Tom. 6 days of the promised week had passed. The tension had reached a critical point. Tom hardly spoke, and Josephine was afraid to say a word too many. Emily locked herself in her room and didn't even come out for dinner. Jacob became aggressive, snapping at his mother and slamming doors. On Saturday evening, when the children went to bed, Josephine went down to the living room. Tom was sitting on the sofa, staring into space. She sat down opposite him. She said that tomorrow was the last day of the week he had asked for. She needed to know his decision. Tom looked up at her. He said he had made a decision, but he would tell her tomorrow, in the evening, when the children went to bed. Josephine nodded. Tomorrow, then. Tomorrow, everything would be decided. They went to their separate rooms. The house fell silent. A tense, heavy silence before the storm. Josephine lay awake, staring into the darkness. Tomorrow, her life would change forever. She didn't know in what direction, but something told her that it wouldn't be good. The clock ticked, counting down the last hours before the catastrophe. The neighbors on Johnson Street were awakened by screams at 3:42 a.m. Mrs. Parker, who lived across the street, was the first to hear a woman's voice, piercing, full of terror, suddenly cut off. Then silence. She woke her husband, but he said it was probably her imagination, or maybe cats fighting in the yard. They went back to sleep. 20 minutes later, Mr. Collins, the neighbor on the right, went out on the porch to smoke. He saw that the light was on in the second-floor bedroom of the Wright's house. He noticed a silhouette in the window, someone standing motionless, then disappearing. Collins put out his cigarette and went back inside, not thinking much of it. At 4 in the morning, the dispatcher for the LaFleur County Sheriff's Department received a call. A male voice, even-tempered, almost emotionless, gave an address and a short phrase. The dispatcher asked twice, not believing what she had heard. The voice repeated the same thing, then the line went dead. The patrol car arrived 8 minutes later. Officers Damon Wheeler and Marcus Jones pulled up to the house at 217 Johnson Street. It was a modest 2-story house with peeling paint on the porch. The front door was wide open. A man was sitting on the porch. Wheeler grabbed his flashlight and shone it on the man. He was about 40 years old, wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans. His hands, shirt, and face were covered in blood. A long-bladed kitchen knife lay on the wooden porch boards nearby. It was also covered in blood. The man raised his head when the light from the lantern hit his face. His eyes were empty, unseeing. He did not resist when Jones ordered him to stand up and put his hands behind his head. Wheeler entered the house, his hand on his holster. He walked through the living room to the stairs. He went upstairs. The light in the bedroom was on. Josephine Wright lay on the floor between the bed and the dresser. She was wearing a nightgown, now completely soaked with blood. Multiple wounds to the chest, abdomen, and neck. A pool of blood spread across the wooden floor, soaking into the carpet at the foot of the bed. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. Wheeler checked her pulse, knowing it was a formality. The woman was dead. He went back downstairs, stepped onto the porch, and nodded to Jones. Jones handcuffed the man and read him his rights. The man did not respond. He stood motionless, as if his body was here but his mind was somewhere far away. The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later. The paramedics went up to the bedroom and came back down a minute later, shaking their heads. They pronounced her dead. The forensic team began their work, taking photographs, measurements, and collecting evidence. The knife on the porch was placed in an evidence bag. Traces of blood led from the bedroom down the stairs to the front door. The children were taken out of the house by neighbors. The eldest daughter, 17, was crying hysterically. The 4 younger children, sleepy and frightened, did not understand what was happening. They were taken to relatives' homes to protect them from the scene. A 15-year-old boy tried to break free, shouting something at the officers. He was taken away by force. Detective Sarah Mitchell received a call at 5 in the morning. She had worked in the sheriff's department for 12 years, the last 5 in the homicide division. Greenwood was a small town, and murders were rare, 2 or 3 a year, usually related to drugs or domestic violence. But the Wright case was different. Sarah arrived at the scene at 6 in the morning. Dawn was just breaking, the sky turning pink and orange. A crowd of neighbors had gathered outside. Everyone knew the Wright family, and everyone was in shock. Sarah walked through the cordon and went up to the house. Forensic technicians were still working in the bedroom. Sarah stood in the doorway, studying the scene. There was blood everywhere, on the floor, on the walls, splattered on the ceiling. The body had already been taken to the morgue, but chalk marked its outline. Multiple wounds indicated rage, a loss of control. This was not a cold-blooded murder. It was a killing in the heat of passion. A crumpled blanket lay on the bed. There were 2 glasses on the nightstand, one with water left in it, the other empty. Family photos on the walls. A normal bedroom of a normal family. Only the floor was covered in blood. Sarah went downstairs. The technician showed her the knife, a standard kitchen knife with a 20-centimeter blade. That particular knife was missing from the kitchen drawer. The set was incomplete. The knife was from this house. No planning, no preparation. He took the first thing he could find. The suspect was at the sheriff's office. Sarah drove there, studying the preliminary data on the way. Tom Wright, 42 years old, works as an operator at a sawmill. Married to the victim for 18 years. 5 children. No record, no criminal history. A model citizen, until he killed his wife. In the interrogation room, Tom sat at a metal table. The blood had been washed off, but stains remained on his skin and under his fingernails. He had been given a clean t-shirt from the detention center. He stared at the wall without blinking. Sarah sat down opposite him, turned on the tape recorder, and stated the date, time, and names of those present. Tom didn't look at her. Sarah started with simple questions: name, address, age. He answered in monosyllables, monotonously. She asked if he understood where he was and why. Tom nodded. She asked if he wanted a lawyer. Tom shook his head. He said he didn't need a lawyer. He killed his wife. That's all you need to know. Sarah continued. She asked what happened last night. Tom closed his eyes. He was silent for a long time. Then he spoke, slowly, with pauses, as if each word caused physical pain. They went to bed separately, as they had for the past 2 weeks. He was in the guest room. She was in the bedroom. Around 3 in the morning, he woke up from a nightmare. He doesn't remember what he dreamed, but he woke up covered in sweat, his heart pounding. He got up, went down to the kitchen, drank some water. He walked around the house, unable to calm down. Then he went upstairs. He doesn't know why. He just went up. He stood at the door of their bedroom. The light was off, but the door was ajar. He went in. Josephine was lying on the bed, awake. She turned to him and sat up. She asked if he couldn't sleep. Tom stood in the doorway. He looked at her, the woman he had loved for 18 years, the woman who had given him 5 children. No, not 5, 2, only 2. He asked her how. How could she have done this for 9 years? How could she look him in the eye, lie to him, live this lie every day? Josephine cried. She said she didn't know, that she hated herself, that she wanted to stop, but couldn't. Tom moved closer. He asked if she had ever loved him, or had it all been a lie from the beginning. Josephine got out of bed. She approached him and tried to touch his hand. She said she had loved him, that she loved him, that he was a good man, a good father, that she had ruined everything and regretted it. Tom pulled away. He felt something inside him breaking, tearing, exploding. He doesn't remember how he went down to the kitchen. He doesn't remember taking the knife out of the drawer. He only remembers returning to the bedroom. Josephine was standing by the window, looking out at the street. She turned and saw him with the knife. Her eyes widened. Tom stopped. He froze in place. Two desires fought inside him: to leave, to throw away the knife, or to continue. 9 years of pain, betrayal, and lies poured out at once. He took a step forward. Josephine tried to back away, stumbled over the edge of the carpet. She screamed. He doesn't remember the rest. It's like a gap in his memory. He only remembers standing over her, her lying on the floor, not moving, the knife in his hand, blood everywhere. He left the house and sat down on the porch. He took his phone and called the emergency services. He said he had killed his wife. Then he just sat and waited. Sarah listened and took notes. Tom finished talking and fell silent. He lowered his head onto the table and covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook, but there was no sound. Sarah turned off the recorder. She called an officer to take the suspect to a cell. Over the next 2 days, Sarah gathered evidence. She interviewed the neighbors. Mrs. Parker had heard screams. Mr. Collins had seen a light in the window. No one had heard any arguments beforehand, no signs of domestic violence. An exemplary couple, 5 children, living quietly. Kevin Wright came to the station himself. He looked broken. Sarah questioned him in a separate room. Kevin told her everything, about his relationship with Josephine, about the 3 children, about how Tom found out 2 weeks ago. He spoke with difficulty, pausing, but he told her everything. When he finished, he asked, "Is it my fault that Josephine is dead?" Sarah didn't answer. She recorded his statement and let him go. Kevin left the station hunched over, as if the weight on his shoulders was crushing him. Reverend James Cole testified about Josephine's condition in recent months, about her torment, about her attempts to confess, about the conversation with Tom on the porch, about the impossibility of forgiveness. Sarah listened, took notes, and pieced together the picture. Emily, the eldest daughter, gave her testimony in the presence of a psychologist. She talked about the tension in the house over the last 2 weeks, how her father hadn't spoken to her mother, how everyone felt a catastrophe was coming. She cried and said she knew something was going to happen. But she didn't think it would be this. The forensic examination confirmed 23 stab wounds, most of them to the chest and abdomen. Death occurred within minutes from blood loss. There were no defensive wounds on the hands. The victim did not resist or did not have time to. The murder was committed in a state of extreme emotional agitation. Tom's phone contained a history of search queries from the last 2 weeks, articles on overcoming infidelity, forums for betrayed spouses, paternity tests. The man was trying to find a way to live with the truth. He didn't find it. 3 days after the murder, Sarah closed the case file. The picture was complete. Tom Wright, 42, killed his wife Josephine Wright in a fit of rage after learning of her 9-year affair with his own brother and that 3 of their 5 children were not his. The charge was second-degree murder. Tom pleaded guilty and did not dispute the facts. The children were divided among relatives. Emily and Jacob went to Tom's sister in Memphis. Kayla, Ethan, and Sophie went to Josephine's brother in Jackson. The family was destroyed. 5 children lost both parents in one night. One was killed, the other was sent to prison. Sarah sat in her office, looking at photos from the crime scene. She saw happy family photos on the refrigerator in the Wrights' house. She thought about how lies eat away at you from the inside, how secrets destroy lives. Josephine tried to keep her family together with silence. Instead, she destroyed it with the truth. And Tom, unable to forgive, destroyed everything completely. The trial began 6 months later. April in Mississippi was rainy, and the gray sky reflected the mood in the Leflore County Courthouse. The courthouse was old, built in the 1930s, with high ceilings and wooden benches that creaked under the weight of visitors. Tom Wright sat at the defense table in an orange prison jumpsuit. 6 months in pretrial detention had aged him. His hair had turned gray, his face was gaunt, his shoulders slumped. He stared straight ahead, not looking up at the audience. His sister Margaret sat in the front row with Emily and Jacob. His daughter cried quietly. His son sat with a stony face. Prosecutor Daniel Hartley was an experienced lawyer who had worked in the county for 20 years. He presented the case methodically, without emotion, facts, evidence, expert testimony. He showed photographs from the crime scene. Muffled sobs rang out in the courtroom. Emily covered her face with her hands. The defense was led by Robert Clark, a court-appointed attorney. He did not deny the fact of the murder. It was impossible to deny. The defense strategy was based on the state of affect, on the psychological trauma that Tom experienced when he learned of the 9-year affair. The first witness for the prosecution was Detective Sarah Mitchell. She described the investigation, Tom's confession, and the evidence. Her voice was professionally neutral, but when she mentioned the children, there was a note of human pain in it. Kevin Wright testified on the second day. He had lost weight, looked haggard, and appeared much older than his 38 years. He spoke about his relationship with Josephine, the birth of their 3 children, and how Tom learned the truth. His voice broke, his hands trembled. When asked by the prosecutor if he felt guilty about Josephine's death, Kevin did not answer immediately. He was silent for a long time, then simply nodded. The judge asked him to answer aloud. Kevin said yes, every day. The prosecutor asked if the relationship had continued until the confession. Kevin confirmed that they had last seen each other a month before Josephine told Tom. He wanted to end it, but couldn't. He said it was more than sex. They talked. He understood her. Tom sat motionless, but Sarah, watching from the gallery, saw his knuckles turn white on the table. Reverend James Cole testified about Josephine's condition, how she tried to confess, how she was tormented by guilt, how she sought the strength to confess. He recounted his conversation with Tom on the porch, his attempt to help, his words about forgiveness. Tom said then that he didn't know how to forgive. The Reverend bowed his head. Maybe he could have done more, said the right words. Psychologist Dr. Emma Rodriguez, invited by the defense, explained the concept of acute stress disorder. A person who has experienced trauma of this magnitude, learning that 3 of his 5 children are not his, that his wife has been cheating on him for 9 years with his own brother, may lose control of his actions. Emotional distress is not an excuse, but an explanation. Tom did not plan the murder. He did not prepare for it. It was a reaction to unbearable pain. The prosecutor objected, saying that Tom had 2 weeks to think it over. He could have left, filed for divorce, started a new life. Instead, he took a knife and killed the mother of his children. 23 stab wounds are not a momentary loss of control. They are rage directed at destruction. The defense presented records from Tom's phone, search queries about how to survive betrayal, how to forgive, how to save a family. The man was trying to find a way out, but the pain was too strong. That night, when he entered the bedroom and saw the wife who had ruined his life, he broke down completely. Emily was not called to testify. She is a minor and had already given testimony to the investigation. But on the 4th day of the trial, she asked to speak. After consultation, the judge allowed it. The girl climbed onto the podium, holding onto the railing. Her legs could barely hold her. She spoke quietly, but the courtroom was completely silent. She said she loved her father, that he had never been cruel, never raised a hand to the children or her mother, that he had been a good father to all 5 of them, without distinction, that she had seen him dying inside for the last 2 weeks. Then she cried and couldn't continue. She was taken out of the courtroom. The trial lasted a week. The 12-member jury deliberated for 2 days. The verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Not first degree. They recognized the state of affect, but they did not acquit him. Murder remains murder. Judge Robert McNeil read the sentence: 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Tom listened, standing up. He didn't flinch or cry. He just nodded. As he was being led away, he turned to his children. Emily was sobbing. Jacob was staring at the floor. Tom moved his lips. Sarah read his lips. "I'm sorry." She didn't know who it was addressed to, the children or his dead wife. A month after the sentencing, Sarah went to Greenwood Cemetery. Josephine's grave was in the old part, under an oak tree. A simple gravestone, a name, dates, the inscription, "Loving Mother." Flowers were wilting in a vase. Someone had visited recently. Sarah stood by the grave, thinking about the senselessness of it all. Josephine had kept a secret to save her family, and destroyed it. Tom loved his children, and lost them all. Kevin wanted passion, and got a ruined life. 5 children lost both parents and their home. Kevin left Greenwood a week after the trial. He lost his job. His boss didn't forgive the scandal. His fiancée had long since left. His relatives wouldn't talk to him. He moved to Texas and got a job as a warehouse loader. He lived alone in a small apartment, worked, and came home. He didn't date women or seek companionship. He just existed, carrying the burden of guilt. The children lived separately. Emily and Jacob lived in Memphis with Aunt Margaret. The girl finished school and enrolled in college to study psychology. She wanted to help people cope with trauma. Jacob withdrew, hardly spoke, and went to a psychologist twice a week. Kayla, Ethan, and Sophie lived in Jackson with Uncle Mark, Josephine's brother. Mark was a kind man, but 3 children at once was a heavy burden. Sophie didn't remember that night. She was 4, and her memory had erased the details. But she asked about her mom and dad constantly. Uncle said that her mom was in heaven and her dad was far away. Someday, he would explain the truth, when they were ready. Josephine kept the secret for 9 years. When she confessed, she set off a chain of events that ended in her death. If she had kept quiet, she would have lived. The family would have remained intact. But the lie was eating away at her from the inside. The truth seemed like liberation.